morning, everybody. Lovely to see your beautiful faces tonight. We're so happy to welcome Sharon Olds, our wonderful poet, and her new work talking about these great poets. I'm going to read Mark Doty's words. He's unfortunately was not able to come tonight. With unfailing courage and a profound moral intelligence, with an unshakable faith in the necessity of inquiry into experience, Sharon Olds has crafted a life's work of remarkable power. The driving rhythms and artful structures of her poems are in service of a rigorous examination of her own life and the lives of those around her. By writing with such candor and clarity, Olds has granted younger poets, especially women, permission to speak. Her poems, in their evocation of trauma or desire, in their grief and joy and comedy, have opened new possibilities for poetry in our time. She is an American master and a national treasure. I'm pleased to introduce Sharon Olds.
Thank you. Hi, hey, we're here. Thank you so much. I'm so glad to see you all here. And I want to add, so how oh, I like that, Jean, a little, the musical introit, or however it's pronounced. And I want to add my thanks to Dorothy Gulbenkian Blaney, who made this evening and the others like it each year possible. And when I was thinking about her today, I was thinking, Dorothy, come home. I was thinking of celebrating her gift to us, whom, you know, many of us will never meet her. And I've been thinking a lot about the two, I believe, previous deliverers of the Blaney Lecture, my colleagues and sisters, the brilliant poets Elizabeth Alexander and Joy Harjo. And I know, without actually having been here, but I know for sure, that those lectures gave pleasure and also gave knowledge. When I was starting to think about tonight, I realized that I felt I don't know anything about the poems that I'm going to read you. That's why I call it the Blaney Reading. Looking up the dates, I was not off by hundreds of years on any of the dates, but by scores of decades I was. I remembered when the results of my MA written exams at Columbia University came back, it was recommended that I not continue for the PhD, but regard my MA as terminal. But once I wrote my MA thesis, which was about Emerson's prosody, then they let me stay. But I've been reassuring myself in terms of just being one of the many people, and many of us are poets, not all poets, but many of us are, who feel they don't understand anything, that one of the pleasures of just talking about poems can be that it confirms or expands our sense of what things are like, what it is like, or for those who don't use similes but metaphors, what it is to be alive, and what our human situation feels like. This to me doesn't mean money so much as matter, the matter of the spirit of our lives, what it feels like in its rhyme and meter. So, although I can't promise you that you will learn nothing this evening, I cannot guarantee it, but I feel I can safely predict it because it's not my desire to teach you anything. I want to spend a little time with you inside and around some of my favorite poems and with some of my favorite people here. As people who love to swim, like to spend time in the water together. occasionally when I sit in my living room at night watching The Voice, now that America's Next Top Model is not on this season, I think of one way Keats spent some of his free time. He, being a working man, he had very little free time in his whole life. But on a sunny day, as I understand, he would lie on his back on a hillside and watch the clouds move across the sky, dreaming awake. So, as if taking his mind out of its various harnesses and letting it wander. So I want to invite you for the next hour to do something like that, watching a few poems float by or experiencing yourself as a few poems float by. I think that's what art is. It's experiencing oneself and experience the other as if from the inside, which is our only hope. And being from San Francisco, all day it's been this idea of watching a few poems float by. It's been running through my head, sitting on the top of the bay, watching the fog roll away. Sitting on the top of the bay, wasting time. And then I just have to da 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 da. Whoa, whoa. So I want to start with Chaucer. With 7 lines, a strophe from Troilus and Cressida. Chaucer, who is dear to us for so many reasons, among them that he wrote in English, when English looked very amateur as a language to be writing in compared to Latin. And I would say, who among us here, meaning I bet all of us, desire to write in a music similar to the music that we feel in the life that floats by us and through us. So our work of art can feel true to our common life as well as to a crafted life. Just after the 7 lines I'm going to read you in a couple of minutes is a little riff Chaucer wrote on the risks of his writing in the new demotic. I didn't look up demotic, but I hope that's what I'm trying to say, demotic. There was so much diversity of Englishes in the 1380s, right? So kind of like today. And so much uncertainty among some of the writers about what was correct and what would be comprehensible. Or, as he says, and for there is so great diversity in English and in writing of our tongue, so pray I God that none miswrite thee, nay they mismeter for default of tongue, and read whereso thou be, or else sung, that thou be understood, God, I beseech, but yet to purpose of my rather speech. So what I'm going to read you because I love the mouth feel of Middle English. It's not like Pig Latin or Op, but it is like a code to me, like the language, our language, one of our many languages under a spell. And what makes this strophe a favorite of mine is partly that the lines sound a little like a half-secret language, and partly that their grammar is rich with imperative and conditional, and that it's modest and that it's humorous. So I'll give a rough translation first. Go, little book, go, my little tragedy. He's talking to Troilus and Cressida, which he's just finished. May God, may God, before your maker dies, little book, send him some comedy to write. But, little book, don't be envious. But this part always makes me, gives me tears. But be subject to all poetry. and kiss the steps, whereas thou seest pace Virgil, Ovid, Homer, Lucan, and Statius. Go, little book, go, little mine tragedie. Their God, thy maker, yet ere that he die, so sende mich to maken some comedy. But, little book, no making thou non-vie, but subject be to all a poesy, and kiss the steps, whereas thou seest pace Virgil, Vergili, Ovidi, Homer, Lucan, and Stace. And these days I think of it as, and kiss the steps, whereas thou seest pace Virgil, Ovid, Homer, Lucan, Stace, Clifton, Stone, Rich, Cannell, Levine, and so many more who have made our days and our poems possible. Some of them up there. So I also love that Chaucer is talking to his book, wishing it to do credit to its forebears, commanding it to kiss the stairs like the footprints where the teachers have trod. And I like to say the commands also, I discovered today when I was practicing. Don't be envious. I'm usually hide the fact that I'm a very bossy person. I sometimes hide it so well that I'm like really weak and non-leader-like. But when I'm saying don't be envious, be subject to poetry, kiss those steps, it turns out it's deeply moving to me, thrilling to tell people what to do. So I learned something today. The spirit that drew me to the next poem, to George Herbert's poem Virtue, is a very different spirit. Its order is soothing. Its regular meter has a sound of certainty. It's sort of like the lives that I thought were happening in the other kids' houses. If I walked by their houses at night, saw the golden light in the windows. It wasn't blue yet. It was golden, and imagined them to be in happy families, not knowing that everyone in the world walks by every golden window and thinks, I'm the unhappy one. I mean, that's not really true, but maybe 99 out of 100 people. So I realized that's one reason I love this poem that I'm about to read to you. Out of the 56 feet in this poem, all but 5 are Iams. Now, a foot is a imaginary creature made of a certain number of emphases in English, strong and weak beats, and names have been given to those feet. I am trochee and a pest dactylic spondipirus. So I'll say a few words about scansion in a few minutes. But I noticed when I was studying the poem that the first trochee, the first off, just offbeat, is the word angry. What a hot place to invert the beat of the poem. Other words that have that meter-switched emphasis include bids and full and only, important words. And the one spondy in the poem, world, turn, seems to me, while I'm reading it, to, as if, slow down the rotation of the globe. I love the power that rhythm wields. Not surprising, since we're creatures built on rhythm, breath, and heartbeat. So this poem enacts in its craft a sense of order and a passion of emphasis which interrupts order. Virtue by George Herbert. Sweet day, so cool, so calm, so bright, bridal of the earth and sky. The dew shall weep thy fall tonight, for thou must die. Sweet rose, whose hue, angry and brave, bids the rash gazer wipe her eye. Thy root is ever in its grave, and thou must die. Sweet spring, full of sweet days and roses, a box where sweets compacted lie. My music shows ye have your closes, and all must die. Only a sweet and virtuous soul, like seasoned timber, never gives. But though the whole world turn to coal, then chiefly lives. I wish we could all get up and dance. So, my favorite parts of the poem are the kind of hinge, I don't know why I call them hinge parts, slightly riddling parts. To me, angry and brave bids the rash gazer is like a spell. You could, if you were afraid, you could just say, angry and brave bids the rash gazer, and it's as if the danger around you might melt away. Or it seems like a secret identity of like a witch named Bid the Brash. Since we come to each word by itself without knowing what's coming next, we are reading how many hundred poems in a poem of this many lines. The first one has one word, the second two, etc. So the way it unfolds is so exciting. And this is kind of an invitation to you to think about which are your favorite poems and why. And this looking at virtue showed me that the unreason in poems appeals to me as much as the reason, and the musical, the percussive, almost as much as the sense. And in virtue, that moment of contradiction, it's like for me of secrecy broken out of. That's the kind of thing I mean by the meaning, as if these things are meaningful emotionally and humanly. Secrecy broken out of. Moment of revelation, like a veil pulled aside, for me is the last line, the last three lines. So first, a sweet soul is compared to seasoned timber, wood acted on by weather, maybe seawater, tar, oil. And then suddenly the fire which has consumed the world has come and gone, and all wood is coal, and yet green and fresh, especially green and fresh, chief among greennesses and freshnesses. I just get such goosies. That's from American Idol, from Jennifer Lopez taught me to mention my goosies when I'm thrilled by a work of art. So that paradox, I love the fierceness of it, the miraculousness of it, the otherworldliness. I love the denial. I love denial. So when I first thought of doing this as a Blaney reading, a list came to my mind. Go Little Book, Sweet Day, that's virtue, Spotted Hawk, that comes next, The Owl, Burns Bacon, Jasper, Texas, The Singing, Our Dust. And when I turned from looking at virtue to looking at Leaves of Grass, section 52, Spotted Hawk, the energy of it was astonishing. Swoop, accuse, complain, yawp, coax, fling. And then that fierce claim, the day held back for me. So I knew immediately I was in the presence of a brother, that is someone who doubts his value, who doubts himself in some way, and is standing up for himself by making a huge claim. I am right here, Whitman says, speaking right to you. I have godlike powers. So this section has 16 lines. I love all the action in it and the force with which the voice approaches us. And I love that the lines leap about, but a scene appears, a kind of moral, wild landscape. Is he flirting with us? Yeah. Is he longing for us? Oh, yeah. Is he sure of us? He seems sure. He's brave about seeming sure. The spotted hawk swoops by and accuses me. He complains of my gab and my loitering. I too am not a bit tamed. I too am untranslatable. I sound my barbaric yawp over the roofs of the world. The last scud of day holds back for me. It flings my likeness after the rest, and true as any on the shadowed wilds, it coaxes me to the vapor and the dusk. I depart as air. I shake my white locks at the runaway sun. I effuse my flesh in eddies and drift it in lacy jags. I bequeath myself to the dirt to grow from the grass I love. If you want me again, look for me under your boot soles. You will hardly know who I am or what I mean, but I shall be good health to you, nevertheless, and filter and fiber your blood. Failing to fetch me, at first, keep encouraged. Missing me one place, search another. I stop somewhere, waiting for you. So when I was 15 years old, and I read this for the first time, I felt as if the poetry dissolved around me and then resolved with me inside of it. When I first read that line, effuse, eddies, drift, lacy jags. I didn't know much about sex yet, but if I'd known the name of what happened to me sometimes on its own, I would have thought his line was like fainting and or coming. Matter turned incorporeal. It turned to spirit. Language blossomed. But my favorite line is, and look for me under your boot soles, for the magic of it, and that it was apparently humble, but had its command of which it was confident. I love stop somewhere, as if there is a power against death, which I think many people know that there is. And also stop meaning die and tarry and lie in wait. And when I scan Leaves of Grass, this section, I'm surprised by how iambic it is. It's got a lot of counterpoint, but its basic rhythm is very iambic. English and American literary poetry's basic rhythm still at that time. While readying myself for tonight, I did a fairly close scansion study and discovered the momentum of a lot of forward galloping feet. And a pest, and each dactyl, unexpected among all the anapests and iams, sort of like a change-up pitch that you aren't expecting and that is thrilling, especially if you can hit it. And Whitman's metrics reminded me of like a great dancer, a great improv jazz dancer, able to dance back and forth, I think, between 3/4 time and 4/4 time. I'm not good enough at music to know if that's true, but I think that that's actually what he's doing, one thing that he's doing. So I'll just have a little interval about scansion, just because I realized I'm so interested in it and no one else is. So it could, be something different. Scansion is, for me, a way of talking about percussion for people who are really interested in percussion. I remember I was maybe 3 or 4 when I heard my first joke that I knew was a joke. And someone was saying, "Oh, I love pancakes. I've got trunks full of them at home." And I knew there was something wrong there, but I couldn't figure it out. And then, they would be stale. And then, a little like that drifting and lacy jags, incorporeality came over me. There may be syllabic poets who think about syllables while they are writing and drinking their Syllabub. I just had to add that for Charlie. I have no idea what it would feel like to be a syllabic writer. I think that C.K. Williams has poems with 11 syllables in each line. But in any case, I think that the act of scansion and the act of writing a first draft are as different as our doing down and dirty rock and roll and those Arthur Godfrey shoe prints on the floor to teach us dance steps. So scansion comes after, way after, and is a way of thinking about beat, I think, for me, and a way of obsessing. It's a kind of counting, like what the Dracula Count did on Sesame Street when my kids were kids. He drooled over counting. He longed to count. He loved it. He needed it. Numbers. Oh, I love numbers with those, vampire-like canines. He loved scansion, I'm sure. I look forward to scanning poems knowing that I'll be calm while I'm doing it. And my eagerness is not really that of an addict. I can go weeks without scanning a poem. But if I want to get to know a poem or a poet on the systemic level, like the biblical level, breath and heartbeat, respiratorily, cardiovascularly, one of the ways I do it is to divide a line into beat, arbitrary. Different people divide lines into different feet, and then chart the rhythms of the feet. I also do it by charting the rhymes. So next to a poem on the right, because I'm right-handed, there will be a tall, wavering column of letters. If it's a traditional poem, it might go A, B, B, A, C, D, D, C, but often it goes A, B, C, B, A, D, E, C, C, D, F, A, G, G, etc. I like it. Melody and harmony, rhyme and off-rhyme, and off-rhyme, interest my ears and brain a lot and give them a lot of pleasure. Similarity and difference, dissonance, resolution, it all has very strong emotional meanings for me while I'm looking at the poem's physical connotations that are sometimes separate from the denotations of the words, but not always. So rhyme interests me a lot, but beat interests me even more. And of course, the relationship between the two is very hot, hard to chart, but thrilling to try. And at this point in making my notes for tonight, my notes began to go a little wild. And they said, I no longer fear that beat interests me so much because I was a beaten child. That was the note I made. And then another one, I think I love scansion because it is related to dantion. It gets to know the action of a poem, not what a poem passively receives. And then later I thought, what does a poem passively receive? I have no idea what I was talking about or what I was thinking there. And now, Edward Thomas's The Owl. He's looking up to Lucille there. I love this poem partly because Galway and I used to do choral readings of it at readings sometimes, reciting it from memory simultaneously. And neither of us would switch our sense of the enjambment over to the other person's ever. So every time we did it, there was this sort of moment in the middle where one poet evidently thought there should be a pause and the other did not. I don't think we ever talked about it. I think we just kept on with each of our beliefs. You might hear the spondees in the owl, wind, tired, food, fire, birds, voice. Not a long poem, 3 spondees. I love the strength and slowness of those. And then you can tell me later how annoying it has been that I talk about the poems before I read them. I debated where to put this stuff, and I decided half before, half after though I'm kind of annoyed at people who do it this way. So another thing I love about this poem is that it's plain and elemental. It's direct address. Anyone, soldiers and poor, anyone can understand it. And at the same time, it has old-fashioned diction. Tired, yet so that rest. There might be just something wrong with my brain, but when I was a child, just to say, but so that, it was another one of those half faint, half come experiences that children have. That in my case, I thought God was trying to tell me something. I knew nothing. I just thought. But actually, I knew with these that it was just pleasure, knowing how hungry, tired, and cold was I. It's like something's wrong. Tired yet so that rest. Chaos. What are they saying? I don't understand. Oh, but I did. Tired yet so that rest became the sweetest thing upon the earth. And then I get the same goosebumps from feeling that I didn't come to the wrong planet, that we are in the place where the language is ours, and we talk it and sing it to each other. Then there are a lot of repetitions in the owl. Only 2 out of the about 7 or 8 are end rhymes. So he's repeating words inside the line. Never noticed this until I started studying it. I love that at the end of the poem he remembers the others. And this is The Owl, Edward Thomas. Downhill I came, hungry and yet not starved, cold, yet had heat within me that was proof against the north wind, tired, yet so that rest had seemed the sweetest thing under a roof. Then at the inn I had food, fire, and rest, knowing how hungry, cold, and tired was I. All of the night was quite barred out except an owl's cry, a most melancholy cry, shaken out long and clear upon the hill. No merry note, nor cause of merriment, but one telling me plain what I escaped, and others could not, that night as in I went. And salted was my food, and my repose, salted and sobered too by the bird's voice speaking for all who lay under the stars, soldiers and poor, unable to rejoice. The title of this poem, so unnerving and kind of newspaper headline-ish, and the beat of this poem compared to all the others we heard, or would have heard if I had had time to also have time to spend time together with Lucille Clifton, C.K. Williams, and Carolyn Wright, C.D. Wright. Yes, syncopated rhythm, a great mixture of different feet. Scanning this poem just makes you very jumpy, and there's a lot of pyrrhics. The series of unaccented syllables that make it a little conversational, that take it a little out of traditional poetry. So just in the first 5 lines, there are 2 pyrrhics and a tribrach, which is 3 softs, and a leftover weak syllable at the end of a line, used to be called, of course, a feminine ending. It's just a leftover weak syllable as opposed to a leftover strong syllable. So I love this poem so much because it impeccably found the ordinary language for the unspeakable. What is the unspeakable? The human. The species which kills its young. Therefore, the species which some people feel deserves to die. I don't feel that. But definitely a species which sometimes seems to try to earn our extinction. But I love this poem because it gives me all I need. It gives me beauty and power and understanding and presence and the hope of the unspeakable being spoken. A Bronzeville mother loiters in Mississippi. Meanwhile, a Mississippi mother burns bacon. By Gwendolyn Brooks. From the first, it had been like a ballad. It had the beat inevitable. It had the blood. A wildness cut up and tied in little bunches, like the 4-line stanzas of the ballads she had never quite understood, the ballads they had set her to in school. Herself, the milk-white maid, the maid mild of the ballad, pursued by the dark villain, rescued by the fine prince, the happiness ever after that was worth anything. It was good to be a maid mild. That made the breath go fast. Her bacon burned. She hastened to hide it in the step-on can and drew more strips from the meat case. The eggs and sour milk biscuits did well. She set out a jar of her new quince preserve. But there was something about the matter of the dark villain. He should have been older, perhaps. The hacking down of a villain was more fun to think about when his menace possessed undisputed breadth, undisputed height, and a harsh kind of vice. And best of all, when his history was cluttered with the bones of many eaten knights and princesses. I'm just going to read one more section. The fun was disturbed, then all but nullified, when the dark villain was a blackish child of 14, with eyes still too young to be dirty, and a mouth too young to have lost every reminder of its infant softness. One more. That boy must have been surprised, for these were grown-ups. Grown-ups were supposed to be wise, and the fine prince and that other, so tall, so broad, so grown. Perhaps the boy had never guessed that the trouble with grown-ups was that under the magnificent shell of adulthood, just under, waited the baby full of tantrums. It occurred to her that there may have been something ridiculous in the picture of the fine prince rushing, rich with the breadth and height and mature solidness whose lack in the dark villain was impressing her, confronting her more and more as this first day after the trial and acquittal wore on, rushing with his heavy companion to hack down unhorsed that little foe. So much had happened. She could not remember now what that foe had done against her, or if anything had been done. The one thing in the world that she knew with terrifying clarity was that her composition had disintegrated, that, although the pattern prevailed, the breaks were everywhere, that she could think of no thread capable of the necessary sew work. The poem goes on with the breakfast scene, and I remember the first time I read it, not knowing that it was about the murder of the boy Emmett Till, not knowing that this was the wife of the murderer at the table with her and his kids and with the jam. Thank you, Gwendolyn Brooks. She gives us such a picture of the possibilities of human greatness that she carries us. She carries us through.